Singularity.
Hello everyone and welcome to Singularity One-on-One. My name is Nicola, aka Socrates, and as always, I will be the man with the questions. Before we begin today, I would like to invite the audience to support this show in one of two very easy ways. Number one is, please take a minute and go to iTunes and write a very short review of the show. This would help us spread the word so that other people can enjoy those fantastic interviews with some of the most incredible people that I have had the pleasure of doing in the past couple of years. And number two, of course, is you can simply go to our donations page and donate any funds that you deem appropriate, and they would be used to make this show bigger and better. And thank you very much in advance for your support. Today, our guest on the show is Professor Hugo de Garis. Professor de Garis is a well-known researcher in the field of artificial intelligence, but perhaps he's better known in the mainstream as the person who coined, or the prophet of doom, if you will, who coined the term the Artilect War. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Professor de Garis.
Yeah, hi Nicola.
By the way, would you mind if I call you Hugo during the interview?
Yeah, that's fine. That's what I'm used to.
Thank you, Hugo. Really appreciate it. So for those viewers and listeners who are not familiar with you, let me begin our conversation a little bit further back in time with the reasons of why and how you got interested in doing work in the field of artificial intelligence.
Being honest, it's sort of, historically, it's sort of a plan B. My deep love, and now that I'm retired, I've gone back to it, in fact. My deep love was mathematical physics. And when I became a grad student, or in the 70s, that was in London, with a rather famous professor, David Bohm. Now, any physicist, especially in quantum mechanics, would know that name. He's a very famous figure in that domain. So when I was a grad student under him, it became increasingly clear to me that the probability of getting a job as a mathematical physics professor was virtually zero, right? So I gradually drifted off and got into artificial intelligence, which I thought, yeah, I could do that. I could get a job in that because it was an expanding field and everything, whereas theoretical physics professorships slots were dwindling away to zero. So I sort of, in the very early days, drifted into it. But then its potential became increasingly clear to me. I learned way back about the potential of Moore's law. If your listener's not familiar with Moore's law, that's Gordon Moore. He's still alive. He must be in his 80s now. He was one of the co-founders of the microchip company called Intel. And he noticed in the mid-60s that the number of bits you could cram, or number of transistors you could cram onto a chip was doubling every year or so. So he wrote about this trend, and now this trend has been immortalized by the label Moore's law. So I'm a numbers person, a mathematical physicist. So I started doing my own numbers and saying, well, let's assume this trend continues till around, say, 2020. And by that stage, easily technology would be manipulating one bit of information on a single atom, right? And if you're doing that, then quantum optics says that that atom can switch its state in a femtosecond. And if you then calculate, like, if I take a single grain of sugar, or say a grain of sand that's been nanoteched in the near future, and it's manipulating one bit on one atom, then the potential computing capacity, number of bit flips per second in that grain of sand, so let's say 1 millimeter cubed, it outperforms the equivalent bit flip rate, information handling rate of the human brain by a factor I calculated of quintillion, like 1 million trillion times more than the human brain.
10 to the 24th.
Yeah, well, if you have a handheld object, yeah, but this is just a tiny grain of sand, right? Even that grain of sand would outperform the human brain by something like a million trillion times.
Hmm.
So that for me was the writing on the wall. And I'm also very much a political animal. So I'm not just a scientist techie guy. I'm also very political. In the early 80s, I was involved in the men's lib or masculist movement in Europe. We went to the parliament and so forth. So being a political animal, I like extracting the political consequences of future technologies. In fact, my first two books have this common theme. They extrapolate future technological trends and then try to extract the political consequences of those trends. So, if humanity has the capability in the next decade or so of creating these godlike capabilities in technologies, what on earth is that? What kind of impact will that have on humanity? I mean, so for me, the writing's on the wall, right? Sooner or later, humanity this century has to choose. Do we build? I call them artilects. That's artificial intellect. These godlike, massively intelligent machines. So humanity's major choice this century is do we build these artilects or not? And when I tried to look with a very cold eye, and a very cold, harsh, analytic eye at the longer term consequences, I came almost inevitably to the conclusion that the stake here is so high. We're not talking about the possible survival of a country in a major war. Like, I mean, you're a Bulgarian, right? So in the Eastern
I'm
Bloc, you probably.
Canadian.
Yeah, okay, well, were, right. So you're probably highly conscious of in the Second World War the huge effort that the Russians undertook to rid themselves of the Nazis. I mean, a huge sacrifice. What, 20, 30
20 million
million?
officially, and unofficially they say another 5 to 10 million that Stalin
Yeah,
took
yeah, yeah.
care of.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I hear. So, at great expense. So the major wars of the 20th century were at the nation level. Whereas if we have a major war, a passionate war this century, with 21st century weapons, the passion level will never be so high because this time the stake is not the survival of a country, right? This time it's about the survival of a species, us as human beings, because these intellects potentially could become godlike. They could be trillions of trillions of trillions of times above the human capacities.
hopefully that wouldn't be happening again. Wow.
This is China.
I am very much interested in discussing further the concept of the Artilect and the consequent Artilect War and the division of humanity to Terrans and Cosmists and Cyborgs. But before we get there, allow me to challenge you on one point, and that is the uninterrupted progression of Moore's law taken to the level of artificial intelligence. And let me just challenge this by quoting a couple of people, at least three I can come up with right now. Gordon Moore himself doesn't seem to subscribe to the concept of the singularity, and it has opposed, as far as I understand, the fact that Moore's law has implications towards a singularity. Another thing is, just yesterday, I think, or a couple of days ago, I posted a short video of another physicist, theoretical physicist, Michio Kaku, who went on Big Think to argue that Moore's law would be dead within a decade, and that the laws of physics and thermodynamics basically necessitate that we would have serious, very serious trouble going beyond silicon. The problems with that are two. At least one of them was, if you're talking about the molecular computer or single bit computation, then we have a number of issues. One of them is the Heisenberg principle of uncertainty. In other words, we don't know where those bits and pieces are anymore. Secondly, we have the problem of decoherence and issues such as wiring or connecting those bits and pieces in interpretation, leakage, and so on. And the third person is actually a person that I interviewed very recently, and his name is Ramez Naam, and Mez worked on Bing search engine, and he said that the artificial intelligence on Bing and Google is absolutely amazing. And yet it's nothing, in his opinion, nothing to what we are. And he doesn't see how we're ever going to get to human level. And a fourth person that comes to mind actually right now is David Ferrucci himself, whom I interviewed here a few weeks ago, who is the team leader behind Watson, who defeated the best human Jeopardy players in the world, is also very skeptical as to whether we can take Watson towards the singularity. So how do you address those all those skepticisms from people who are within that field?
Well, can I be blunt?
Absolutely. That's
They-
absolutely.
They remind me of people in 1902, who were proving and suggesting that man would never fly. And what happened the following year? So where to start? Well, if I look at ourselves, we human beings, we are the existence proof that it is possible to put molecules together in a certain way. We don't quite yet know how to do that, but we're learning. To put molecules together in a certain way and create a conscious and highly intelligent machine. So there is a way in nature to do this. And we're making progress, exponential progress, not only in electronics, but also in neuroscience. And I see a great wedding coming in the future between these two things. I see Moore's law surviving at least for another decade. And even by 2020, I mean, the electronic capacity will be just be enormous. So even if Moore's law starts to fizzle out after that time, it doesn't really matter. I don't see that happening. But even by 2020 standards, what the Artilect still becomes possible. I see the real problem is our relative ignorance of the microcircuitry of our neurons, of our brains. We don't yet know, we don't understand how this microcircuitry works. Like, how does the brain make a decision? What is a memory? What is consciousness? What is free will? These sorts of deep issues that neuroscience can't yet really answer. But I see that coming. And then even today, if you think about it, today our best, most powerful supercomputers have already reached the equivalent bit processing rate of the human brain. Our supercomputers today, state of the art, is about 10 petaflops. That's 10 to the power 16 bits per second. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the estimated processing rate of the human brain, which you can quickly calculate. Like, we have about 100 billion neurons. That's 10 to the 11. Each neuron, on average, connects to about 10,000 others. So that's 10 to the 4. And roughly maximum each synapse, that's a connection between two neurons, is signaling at about 10 bits a second maximum. So you multiply those three numbers together, so 10 to the 11 times 10 to the 4 times 10 to the 1, and you get 10 to the 16. Mm-hmm. Well, in that little grain of sand, you get hugely more than that. You can calculate quite easily how many atoms in that little grain of sand, and they're all flipping in femtoseconds. So the potential of the technology, even if Moore's law fails after a decade, it's still hugely superior to what the human brain can do. So I see physics, in a sense, utterly eclipsing what biology offers. I mean, and one neuron, what's it doing? It's basically processing a few bits per second. It's just nothing. So when quantum computers come, and I see that coming, in fact, that's one of my research interests. I'm looking into femtotech, and another one is topological quantum computing, TQC. Mm-hmm. The basic idea there is store your quantum bit, your information, store it in what's called a topological quantum field. Which is sort of robust because it has these weird topological properties. you do not lose the information. So it's robust. So if you can do this, then you can scale up to huge number of bits, and then because it's a quantum computer, you get a performance increase of 2 to power n compared to today's classical computers. So if our future Artilects become quantum computers, yeah, all those huge numbers I've just given you, they go out the door. I mean,
but it's a little bit more than just numbers, isn't it? Because numbers are very important. There's no doubt about that. But still, that's kind of like the hardware requirement for building an artificial intelligence, or an Artilect, as you call them. But there's a lot more than just the sort of brute force. There is the as you put it, the knowledge that comes about how those different bits and pieces get connected and get utilized in a coherent unity to produce intelligence. Right?
Yeah, agreed. Yes, agreed. So I see, I agree with you perfectly. I see there are two preconditions for creating artificial intelligence, let's say at human level. One, of course, is just the raw bit rate, being able to, having enough hardware at enough speed to be able to do all this stuff. And that condition, just recently, like this year, last year, has now been satisfied with our supercomputers. We've now reached that goal.
Yeah.
So the second one now, and that's a major challenge, of course, it comes from neuroscience, and that is understanding the functioning, the principles of the micro, as it's called, the microcircuitry of the brain. And how do all these neurons connect up? And that's still a challenge. That's still open, and it's sort of hard to say how many decades that will take to decipher. But progress is exponential. So, Ray Kurzweil, for example, is estimating 2020s sometime.
Yeah.
By the end of the 2020s, we'll probably have a pretty thorough understanding of how the human brain works. And then, of course, the brain builders, once they have those principles coming from neuroscience, they just quickly translate them into their machines. So then I anticipate a kind of wedding between the neuroscientists and the neuroengineers, right? The two will, like in physics, you have theoretical physics and practical physics, but they're really just two branches of the same subject. And so I can imagine neuroengineers and neuroscientists will do the same. They'll just become, the applied and the theory of the same subject. And so future neuroscientists will test their models, their theories of how the brain works on machines, because they'll have the machines.
So why is it that some people, like the ones that I've mentioned before, who have seemingly accomplished the cutting edge of those fields, fail to see those trends, is why I wonder. I mean, yes, you're totally right that Lord Kelvin, I think Lord Kelvin was his name perhaps, who in like 1895 famously pronounced that, heavier than air aircraft are totally impossible to build. And then two bicycle builders from the United States proved him wrong. Yes, that's true. But why is it that those people in the cutting edge, I mean, David Ferrucci is the guy who pretty much built Watson with his team. Michio Kaku is a very well-known theorist. Ramez Naam was a Bing artificial intelligence, part of the team that built the Bing artificial intelligence. Why are they failing to see the writing on the wall?
I wouldn't call Kaku an expert in artificial intelligence. He's a string theorist. I mean, I have great admiration for him as a string theorist, and I'm struggling through his textbooks. But he's a bit of an amateur when it comes to artificial brains and so forth. He's a very popular, what's the term, interpreter, I guess, of popular science, to the masses. And so artificial intelligence is just one of his topics. So, that's Kaku. As for the others, the Watson people, well, just a theory. Maybe they're too close to the problem. They're thinking maybe future intelligence lies in just more of the same of what they're doing, and they're very conscious of the limits of what they're doing. But I see future AI is not coming from von Neumann type computers, based on today's basic assumptions, where you have a distinction between hardware and software, like future neurocircuitry based machines, the hardware software distinction dies away because it's the connectivity and the weighting between the connections that's what's important. So it's a whole other paradigm. So
And what about emerging intelligence as an alternative way of coming up with artificial intelligence?
you mean AI to make AI?
No. Say, for example, it emerges. There are theories that say artificial intelligence might emerge, say, on the global internet, for
I see
example.
where you're going. Okay.
So you have a number of interconnected nodes which are already existing. The number is growing exponentially. And perhaps once they reach a certain point and a certain level of individual sophistication, the total would provide the substrate where such intelligence could potentially emerge.
Well, I suppose all I can say is maybe. This reminds me of kind of a debate I've been having for quite a few years with Ben Goertzel. You've interviewed him, haven't you?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so he and I differ somewhat on basic strategies towards AI. Like, I got interviewed recently in Australia on this point. I see two broad approaches towards reaching human level AI. One is I just label simply the engineering approach, and that's essentially Ben's. And the other one is just copy the brain approach. And now we know the second one, copy the brain. Sooner or later, that will work, right? Because we know the final product. And if we copy the brain in our technologies closely enough, by definition, it will work. And then we'll create a three-dimensional, living, conscious, intelligent machine. So we know that route will be productive. The big question, of course, is how long will it take? Now, Ben's approach, he claims he will just engineer it with his AGI approach. That's artificial general intelligence. Today's AI is basically very narrow. Lots and lots of little narrow applications like Google and fraud detection on checks and routing in cell phone. There's lots of applications now, but they're all very specialized and rather narrow. But Ben thinks just by thinking, and he's got a major book coming out pretty soon called Building Better Minds, where he's put out, he's been thinking about, Ben's a genius, right? He's a very, very smart guy. So he's been thinking about this problem for a long time. So he wrote up his ideas in this book that'll be out pretty soon. And he just wants to implement it. So he's now based in Hong Kong, and he's collecting quite a team, and he will try to implement his ideas that are in this book on how to engineer an artificial intelligence that has general intelligence that's like humans. We can tackle all kinds of different problems and solve them successfully. So it's a big debate. It's a big question mark. Which of those two broad approaches will pan out faster? And I don't know. I mean, Ben may surprise me in a year or two. On the other hand, in a sense, if you think about it, the AI research, I call them intelligists, the people who try to generate artificial intelligence. The intelligists have been trying for how long? God, over nearly 60 years, right?
Since
nearly
the 1950s, if not earlier.
Yeah. The first AI conference was in '56.
Yeah.
So it's coming on for nearly 60 years. People have been trying to fulfill this dream of creating intelligent machines and have not succeeded. Now you may argue, well, that's because in the past there wasn't enough hardware, not enough bits per second, and maybe. But I'm cynical that the real reason is they don't know what intelligence is, right? So it's hard to model and engineer something when you don't know what the something is.
So it's a definite requirement that we must sort of reverse engineer the brain before we're able to get there.
Well, I would say that. Ben would say no.
Yeah.
And he gets quite passionate about it. Yeah. I mean, Ray Kurzweil, for example, he takes that route. He says probably simulating the brain is the way to go, and I agree. I'm anticipating this great wedding between the effects of Moore's law, so these fabulous capacities of near future electronics, plus near future knowledge coming from neuroscience. And like, have you heard of a guy? In fact, if you haven't interviewed him, might be a really good candidate. Have you heard of a guy called Markram? Henry Markram?
Henry Markram, yes, he's the head of the Blue Brain project. I've invited him a couple of times, but he hasn't responded.
Yeah, he's a bit of a prickly guy, being frank. If you like, I could try to, I could email him. Like
That would be fantastic. I would really appreciate it. I had a couple of other people who emailed him to sort of
jog him. Yeah.
Promote my show. I mean, to sort of invite him on my show, but you never know. Maybe we're reaching the critical mass.
Ben and I, a bit over a year ago, we came out with the planet's first special issue in a academic journal on artificial brains. And so in that journal were articles summarizing state-of-the-art artificial brains in the world. And we thought that Markram's Blue Brain project was the sexiest on the planet. Now, some of the claims he's making, now he's a really, well, he's both. He's both a hardware electronics expert to some extent, and definitely a neuroscience guy. That's his background, neuroscience. But he's so bright, he can do both. Now, he's claiming by 2018, using Moore's law and IBM, who've been funding him, they will give him like the next generation of super duper computer.
Yeah.
And he's claiming by 2018, he will have at least the full cortex of the rat brain modeled in hardware, and possibly even the human brain. But that's sort of like 1,000 times more. But you can see where things are going. The technology is just, the progress in technology is just so fabulous that sooner or later, all this technology will end up in companies. You'll get a shift from R to D, research to development, and then people suddenly will start noticing that their home robots are getting quite smart. Each year, at each upgrade, they'll notice their home robots and their speaking machines and so on are getting smarter and smarter and smarter. And that's as I see it, that's the beginning of this, what I call the species dominance debate, and it'll just heat up and heat up.
By the way, I don't know if it is because you are located in China or not, but today I'm getting a lot more loss of feedback, audio feedback, than usually. So there's a lot more substantial chunks of our conversation that I am unable to hear in real time. So I hope that doesn't impact on the fluidity of our discussion here. But let us move on with the presumption that we have accomplished, or we are very close to accomplishing, say within a few decades, the level of artificial intelligence that you're talking about. So perhaps now is the time for us to go back to your concept of artilects and how that would play out in terms of dividing the world into cosmists and Terrans and cyborgs. So would you mind elaborating a little bit more on that for the viewers and listeners who are not familiar with your ideas?
Okay. Now, if the problem of deciphering the principles of the microcircuitry of the human brain, if that turns out to be a tougher problem than we anticipate today, then it doesn't really matter much. It just delays things by another decade or two. So the issue doesn't, the issue of species dominance, which species, human beings, should human beings remain the dominant, meaning the most intelligent, the most powerful species, or should humanity decide to give up this status and give it to our machines? So I see that question as dominating our global politics this century because there's just so much at stake. What's at stake is possibly the survival of the human species, because longer term, if humanity does decide to build these artilects, artificial intellects, and they truly do reach their fabulous potential of like trillions of times above human capacities, mental capacities, then who's to say that in a highly advanced form, they might look upon human beings as a kind of inferior pest. You know, like if a mosquito lands on my arm, I don't think twice about slapping this miracle, if you think about it, this miracle of nanotechnology, right? I mean, we could not manufacture a mosquito. Yeah. I mean, if we could, yeah, the guys who did that would get a Nobel Prize, right? I mean, we just slap this damn thing because to us, in our human view of ourselves as the dominant species, we feel ourselves so superior to this pest, the mosquito, that we just zap it, we kill it. Now, who's to say that in the future, if these machines, these godlike creatures, these artilects, come into being, they may end up, treating us in the same way. Now, if it's sort of hard to judge what the time frame will be, I'd say it's very likely this century, you know, given the rate of exponential progress that we're making, both in electronics and neuroscience. But I'd say this issue will really come to fruition this century. So humanity has to make a decision. Now, let's say 50 years into the future, imagine that, you know, with telecommunications and the internet speed doubles every year, and English increasingly is becoming the world language. So imagine all that trend runs to saturation, and virtually everybody speaks the world language, you know, their local national language and the world language. Then ideas travel far more fluidly and easily across the planet. And as a result of that, you get increasingly a kind of cultural homogenization. You know, everyone's pretty much the same, you know, with absorbing the best ideas that the world has to offer. Mm-hmm. And then what's one of my interests, so then you get a kind of global state, the probability of a global state being formed, which is much easier to do if you have a culturally homogenized planet. So imagine, I don't know, 50 whatever years in the future, some globin, it's the label of this, I call it globa, right, ending in the letter A, because so many countries and continents end in the letter A, like your country and my first country, Australia, Canada, America, Asia, Africa, right? So ending in the letter A. So imagine some globin politician thinking about, well, if we, you know, by we I mean humanity, if we decide to build these artilects, what are the possible consequences? Well, even if the risk is like one part in a million or a billion, that these machines may turn against us, as a globin politician, you're not going to take that risk, right? The only risk you'll take is zero. So that policy, which I label Terran, so it's based on the word terra. That's not terror as in terrorist. It's terra as in the earth, right? Terra, like terra firma. So these Terrans, their policy would be that human beings should remain dominant species. Now today this issue it's a bit science fiction-like to most people, but to the techies, you know, the intelligists, right, the guys working in artificial intelligence, artificial brains, like myself, for us it's more and more real, right? It's we see the writing on the wall. So we're seriously starting to talk about this, and your show is based on this premise, right? This is probably, well, I wouldn't say even probable. This issue is the number one dominant question of our century, of our historical era, right? Are we, as human beings, are we going to replace ourselves? That's the issue at stake this century. Okay, now, so I can imagine these Terran politicians will just insist that to ensure that the risk of human beings being taken over by a superior species is zero, is that they're never built in the first place. So, but then I need to talk about the other group. Well, actually there are three, but you know, the main other one, call them cosmists. That's based on the word cosmos, and you know, the universe. Now that's a deliberate choice, because if you're a cosmist, by definition, you are in favor of humanity building these artilects, because building these godlike creatures is a kind of religion almost. I mean, it would be a science-based religion, but it has many of the characteristics of a traditional religion, right? It creates because you'd be God building. You know, these creatures would be just so fabulous, so vastly, hugely, astronomically superior to what human beings are. They'll be effectively godlike. So to the cosmos, building these things is sort of like a religion. It would generate a sense of awe, AWE, a sense of purpose. You would see humanity then as a kind of stepping stone, like a rung on the ladder of upward evolution. You're creating these godlike creatures that would be so powerful they could, they would think 1,000,000 times faster than we do, because they'd be thinking at electronic speeds, and maybe they could think even faster. If you go to like femtotech and attotech and zeptotech and all these future techs that are coming, they could think even faster. They could have effectively unlimited memory, right? Because they could just put huge amounts of memory material together in sort of one place.
And they'll be immortal, which is where the religion idea comes in through.
Yeah, they would be immortal. I mean, if you're going to build these things, why on earth would you program in mortality, right? And if they're smart, they'd very quickly unprogram it out of themselves, right? So you've got this other group, and I mean, there's lots of arguments in their favor. I mean, I can imagine in the fairly near future there will be lots of philosophers getting on the bandwagon, writing arguments in favor of cosmism. That's the ideology of the cosmists, the people who want to build these godlike machines. So the first one, I've sort of given it to you, it's sort of like the big picture argument, right?
Yeah, you can argue Carl Sagan was definitely a cosmist.
Yeah, well, in some ways, I suppose it goes back centuries, right?
Absolutely.
You really start, if you look at it as a historian, I mean, the basic notions, the Nietzsche's Superman in some ways, and so on. So, well, I mean, look at the broad, I mean, as broadly as we can, big picture. We human beings, we live in a universe that is 13.7 billion years old. Right? We know that now, only in the last few years. So we know the age of the Big Bang, when the Big Bang occurred. We also know the age of our solar system. It's about 4.6 billion years old. So that means I'm getting this in the video, out there are of the order in our universe, in our cosmos, there are something like 1 trillion stars, right? That's the big picture. That's the big reality. And they're billions of years older than our solar system. And we now know, astronomy knows that most solar systems, if at least they're at least second generation, they have the higher elements besides just hydrogen and helium. So if they're second generation or older, very probably they will have planets, right? Planets are just dross. They're like the garbage of first generation stars. These first generation stars, they convert the hydrogen and helium into higher elements, and then they explode and they spew out all this crap. And then the second generation stars, they include some of that crap, and that it's heavier elements. So they tend to spin around the edges, around the main sun in the middle, and they form the planets. So the planets are basically first generation stars as crap, right? The dross. Anyway, so a lot of those star systems out there are billions of years older than ours, right? So you probably see where I'm going with this. Now, one of the greatest discoveries of the 19th century was that the laws of physics and chemistry are the same throughout the universe. We know that from studying the light from other stars, distant stars. So now that we know that there are planets virtually everywhere, I mean, we're discovering them almost daily now with latest technologies, exoplanets. So, and we also know that water, H2O, is a very common substance in the universe. So and maybe, I don't know, maybe a tenth of planets within the so-called habitable zone, where H2O, where the temperature is not so hot that it just, the water boils off, or it's not too cold that it's frozen hard, frozen solid. So if the water is liquid form, and that may be the case in about a tenth of planets, well, you've got a zillion planets out there, and a tenth of a zillion is still a zillion, right? So, highly likely, at least bacteria-type life forms are probably extremely commonplace in the universe. And then I guess, and have you heard of Drake's equation?
Yes, yes.
So Drake would say, well, then a certain percentage of those, perhaps you get multicellular forms, and because it's evolutionary advantageous to do that. So you get higher and higher intelligence. So for all we know, there are zillions of highly advanced civilizations out there that are billions of years older than we are. And here's Carl Sagan's vision, because that's all it is at the moment, speculation. Maybe these highly advanced civilizations out there that are billions of years older than we are, maybe they've connected up, right? There's only finite distances between them. So who knows? Maybe they've connected up, and there's a whole hyper civilization of advanced civilizations out there. And we, as human beings, we're too primitive, because we're billions of years younger. We are simply too primitive to join the club, so to speak. Now, if you're interested, I have a whole other theory that I'm trying to get out. And I think SETI is the wrong way to go. I think SIPI, SIPI, is the way to go. Do you want me to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, surely my only concern is that time is advancing, and I'd like to go back to our original thought about the division of humanity to cosmists and Terrans and cyborgs, and I just want to finish that line of reasoning before we go somewhere else.
Yes. Sorry, I'm known for drifting.
Yeah, so perhaps we can kind of increase the pace too.
Have a very lateral thinking type of mind. Okay.
Because we only have about 15 or 20 minutes tops.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Okay, so go into the 2020s when, and assuming the assumptions I've been making are correct, that I see the 2010s, that's this decade, as the decade of massive research, large-scale, widespread research on artificial brains, because Moore's law is allowing it. Right? These artificial brain projects are just popping up like mushrooms all over the planet.
Yeah.
And assume in the 2020s, so the next decade, things shift away from R, research, to D, development. And then you see huge companies set up that provide products and gadgets to people based on the technologies of these artificial brains. And the biggest one, very probably, will be home robots, the home robot industry. So if you ask people how much money would they be prepared to spend on a generally intelligent and useful home robot, and the answer is usually, more than for a car. Right? Not as much as a house, but certainly they would pay more money than for a car if it were truly useful. Could do all the household tasks. So you're talking a major industry, right? Worth over literally $1 trillion a year worldwide. So huge industries. Okay, now as the 2020s progress and maybe into 2030s, you'll very probably notice a trend. With such a big industry, and governments investing a lot of money into these industries, you will obviously get progress. And every year or so, a new model will come out. And so as people buy their second model, the second version, the third version, the fourth version, they and virtually everybody will notice a trend, and that is the intelligence, the artificial intelligence level of these machines keeps rising. So I don't know if you can see this. Like the upper hand, that's human intelligence level, right? And the lower one here, that's let's say future current, machine level intelligence. Now, as the home robots get smarter and smarter every year, as artificial brain technology and science improves, so that means the home robot intelligence level will go up and up and up and up and up. Now, that will be clear to billions of people around the world. And so you can imagine, as a consequence of that, people with their own first-hand experience, seeing for themselves that their own home robots are getting smarter and smarter every year, that will then raise a whole bunch of questions, like, well, sort of obvious, right? So will these machines become as intelligent as human beings? Could they become more intelligent than human beings? Is that a good thing? Is that not dangerous? Should there be like global legislation to put an upper limit on the level of artificial intelligence, so that they're not a threat to human beings? So it's all these questions being hotly debated, and they're already being debated amongst the techies, because we can see the writing on the wall. So these issues are already, I mean, there are action groups like Humanity Plus, transhumanism, and so forth on the internet, interest groups on the internet talking about these issues hotly. But the issue's not quite yet mainstream. People like you are helping that come about. You're well, there are various phases, in the development of this issue. Like phase 0 is when just nothing, not even aware of the issue. Phase 1 I call the intellectuals crying in the wilderness phase. Mm-hmm. So that was pretty much the 80s. And then in the 90s, and now increasingly interest groups, larger numbers of people getting together in groups and organizations and discussing the issues. And then phase 3 will be mainstream, when it gets on the main media. And it's getting that way now. Like next year, 2013, there will be 2 major Hollywood movies, blockbusters, coming out. Steven Spielberg is directing one of them, called Robopocalypse. You can guess from the title what it's about, right? And the other one, I'm not allowed to tell you what it's about because I signed an NDA. All I can tell you, an NDA is a non-disclosure agreement. All I can tell you is that it's by another major Hollywood studio, and it will also be out in the summer, well, Northern Hemisphere summer of 2013. So on the same, similar theme. And I'm the technical advisor to this movie. Mm-hmm. So hopefully by 2014, this issue of species dominance should be much more mainstream. And then phase 4 will be the politics. Once large numbers of people become alarmed, so especially in the 20s and 30s, I see mm-hmm. as the IQ gap between human level and machine level, as that gap closes, then I see the alarm bells going off, left and right. People will start taking sides. The politicians will start getting involved, because people will start getting very, very worried that maybe these machines, if they do become very intelligent, could potentially in the future become a threat.
So
now, there's a third group.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a third group, and they're called the cyborgists. They're human beings. And their argument is, well, imagine I'm a cyborgist. The argument is, as a human, I would love to be an Artilect god. I would love to be immortal and a million trillion times more intelligent, and be able to leave the Earth and explore the universe and be a cosmic being and godlike. I would love to be that. So the arguments of the cyborgists, they're the people, humans, who want to become themselves cyborgs. Now that word is short for cybernetic organism. In other words, part machine, part human. So the idea is these cyborgists become cyborgs, and they can do that by adding intellectual hardware, if you like, to their own brains and whatnot. So then you get into the Kurzweil scenario of having little nano-sized robots in your bloodstream, and they flow all over your body and get into your brain and make connections with the neurons in your brain and eventually replace them. Now, the big question now is, it becomes a philosophical question. If you start doing that, the vastly superior capacities of the technology sooner or later raises the question, to what extent are you still you, right? Because if the machine capacity is like a trillion times above the human capacity, you only have to add one little grain of sand to your own brain before you are no longer human, right? You're effectively an Artilect. You may look human because your body is still human, but in terms of mental capacity, you are 99.9999999 whatever percent Artilect, and only 0.001% human. So from the point of view of the Terrans, the people who are opposed to building Artilects, for them, there's no distinction longer term between a pure machine, a pure Artilect, and a highly advanced cyborg, simply because the capacity of the technology is so great that what's the difference between 100% and 99 point and 1,000 nines, right? It's effectively the same. So I see the Terrans going on the warpath for the sake of the potential survival of human beings, and they will be ideologically opposed, politically opposed, and eventually militarily opposed to the other two groups, the cosmists, the people who dream of creating these godlike machines, and the cyborgists who want to become gods in a sense, want to become Artilects themselves through a series of steps, upgrading themselves from human to Artilect.
Now, you said that there would be virtually no distinction between the cyborgs and the cosmists, or the cyborgs and the machines from the perspective of the Terrans. But I want to perhaps just bring another consideration, and that's the fact that for the last few thousand years, we have failed, to my knowledge, to come up with a definition of humanity, a definition of what it means to be human, which is commonly accepted by all humans. And therefore, my argument could be something like, how could you lose something that you don't know what it is, that you can't define? And maybe being human is a lot more transient than we think it is. Maybe there's no essence, and if we are a process rather than an entity, which is ongoing process, then perhaps you could argue that becoming a cyborg would be the next step of human evolution, not only evolution, but human evolution. And therefore, both the intermediary and the ultimate step of becoming entirely machines, perhaps, would be just transcending or bringing along our humanity to a different level of intelligence.
Well, you, as I see it, what you've done now, you have really put your finger on the issue. This is the nuts and bolts of the debate I see occurring in, say, 2020s, 2030s, as the species dominance debate really gets going. So now it's hard to predict, right? It's complex. There are all kinds of issues involved, and people take sides for all kinds of different reasons. Personally, I'd like to see the creation of a new branch of sociology that looks into these issues, because it is complex. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, what percentage of people would find the growing number of cyborgs as utterly alien? Like for example, I can give a couple of cases where a lot of people are maybe very worried about this. Imagine, I don't know, 20, 60s, 70s, whatever. Imagine you're a young woman and you have to make a decision. You've just given birth to your first child, and there are cyborgs left and right. They're all around you. There are billions of them, right? So you're wondering what characteristics you'd like your newborn child to have as a cyborg. And so you you get some advice and you're told, oh, this, and this. So you tell the surgeons or whatever to, okay, cyborg eyes, cyborg, the verb, cyborg my baby. Okay. And then the baby's like 2 years old, 3 years old, and the mother really starts to realize, hey, this child of mine looks on me as a total moron. It just doesn't it's not interested in communicating with me because I'm thinking a million times slower than it is. It's absorbing the world's knowledge at 10 times over every second kind of thing. Why would it, right? It's not human. Maybe that's answering your question. It is not human, right? It's a cyborg. It's an Artilect in human disguise, and it's just not interested in human beings. So from the point of view of the mother, in a sense, she feels she has killed her baby, right?
How is that different from the generational divide that we're experiencing nowadays?
Oh, come on.
Like with young kids, and even between me and young kids, I am kind of old-fashioned compared to the, early teenagers, let alone older people. Who are, the kids are glued to their cell phones and they're communicating usually in Canada here mostly via texting rather than talking.
Multiply that by 1 trillion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So and another one is, so let's say similar time frame. Imagine you're an older parent and your adult kids come to you and say, Dad, we've decided to cyborg. Right, we're going to become cyborgs and advanced cyborgs, and so
going to the other side, they're betraying the human race.
Yeah. So the parents would then feel that they've lost their kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine the emotions involved. So for all kinds of reasons, similar to the two I've just given, I can imagine the level of alarm. So I just see society dividing bitterly into pro and con of all these technologies that are coming down. And a lot of people, now maybe it's hard to define, but a lot of people will start saying that, as cyborging becomes increasingly common and popular, a lot of people, a fair proportion of humanity will say that we, the human species, we are losing our humanness, right? Humanness, whatever it is getting lost. Right? And I see them, and I label them the Terrans, and I see them organizing. They will say, hey, look, if we as Terrans, if we decide to stay that way, and if we refuse to upgrade ourselves too much, maybe a little at first, it'd be nice to have a bit more memory and have internet direct connection in your brain and all, stuff like that. But once the technology really starts to bite, then you're no longer human. You're something else, right? So imagine the Terrans then saying, well, look, if we Terrans decide to stay more or less as we are, and these cyborgists and the cosmos and the Artilects themselves, the pure machines, if they keep advancing way beyond our Terran capacities, then potentially they become a threat, right? So they may become so advanced they may look on us as a pest. So it's a matter of survival. It's a matter of species survival. Now, if you're a politician, what do politicians do? You've probably heard this famous phrase. They hope for the best, and they plan for the worst. Now, what is the worst case scenario from the point of view of the Terrans? Well, that is that the advanced cyborgs and the Artilects, they just simply decide to wipe out humanity. Now, to ensure that the risk of that happening, that worst case scenario, that the risk of that happening is zero, is the Terrans, the Terran politicians will argue, is that it's to never happen in the first place. Now, you're talking two very powerful ideologies that I see dominating 21st century politics. On the one hand, you have the Terrans, and for them, their Terranism as an ideology, that for them is survival of the human species, right? Absolutely top priority. And
existential threat.
Yeah. The threat of extermination at the hands of and it will be a very, very powerful argument. And on the other hand, you have a quasi-religious argument almost, and hence also very powerful, on the part of the cosmists who want to build artilects and a certain variant, if you like, of cosmism, which is cyborgism. It's a sort of, in my view, a minor variant, because effectively an artilect and a cyborg, an advanced cyborg, are the same thing, right?
Yeah,
Because the
there would
machine,
be merging eventually with
yeah,
different
yeah, yeah,
flavors
yeah.
and colors of the
So,
sort of.
so I see the Terrans just lumping together these two ideologies,
Yeah.
of cyborgism and cosmism. They'll just be two variants of the same thing from the point of view of the Terrans. So I can imagine as the species dominance debate heats up, should humanity build these artilects or not? Then I see the Terrans forming groups, political groups. This issue will be so dominant, so powerful, that whole political parties will be based on this issue, if you see what I
Yeah.
mean. Instead of having, should we have democratic parties or socialist parties or communist parties? Because they were the dominant issue. Who should own capital? Who should own the machines? That was the dominant issue in the 19th and 20th century. But in the 21st century, the dominant issue will be over species dominance, as I see it. And so there'll be political parties formed over this issue. And so, and then they'll take political positions and eventually military positions. The Terrans will simply try to ban the development of these artilects beyond a certain level of artificial intelligence. But that will be opposed by this other group. For them, it's a kind of religion. They will look on the Terrans as absolutely narrow-minded, small-minded, inferior, because there's a whole universe out there, right? The big picture, and and they will do whatever's necessary to fulfill their big dream, and I mean big, right? That's why I call them cosmists, right? That's their perspective, the cosmos. There's a much bigger picture out there, and so you have these two bitterly opposed ideologies that eventually, for the sake of the survival of the human species, the Terrans will be prepared to go to war, and here's a bit of strategy, they cannot wait too long. Like Ray Kurzweil, he has a rather colourful phrase. He says, if a war comes between the Terrans and the cosmists stroke cyborgists, that would be like a war between the US Army, and here's his colourful metaphor, between the US Army and the Amish. I don't know if all your listeners are familiar with who the Amish are, but they're a religious sect in America. And they have these weird ideas that you're not allowed to use any technology that's more modern than 19th century. So literally, they're riding around in horse and buggy. They don't have telephones. They don't have the internet. They're living in the 19th century. So you can imagine, if there's a war between them and the modern US Army, well, to use Ray Kurzweil's phrase, no contest, right? Now that's a strong argument. So
Actually, let me take some issue with that argument, because my actual specialty was armed conflict. And that's how I got into artificial intelligence, because my thesis was on artificial intelligence in times of war. And I was looking at the drone usage in Iraq and Afghanistan. And doing the research there got me involved into the whole Singularity community and gave me the idea. But I can give you a number of examples from history where if you do not talk about an all-out war, and you talk rather into what's called a counterinsurgency warfare, or what people now call war of a third kind, or fifth generation of warfare in other estimates, then in numerous occasions, people from different stages of development, or parties from different stages of development, have come to a stalemate. And you can look at, for example, the Vietnam War, in which you have basically the Vietnamese were basically early 20th century or even 19th century technology. And yet the United States got defeated. And you can look at the insurgency in Afghanistan, and the technology difference between the Taliban and the US and the NATO allies is at least 100 years. And there are many other cases from Africa during the colonization wars, or from Southern Asia, in which, as long as there's no all-out decisive battle between the two parties, but rather it's a counterinsurgency kind of a warfare, then the weaker party, the one that's more obsolete, if you will, in its weapons, has very good chance of resisting based on its tactics rather than weaponry.
Uh-huh. Well,
So
okay.
while I accept many of Ray's arguments, like that's not one of his best ones, in my opinion,
Okay.
personally.
Okay. Well, debatable. I suppose you could argue that if you really wanted to, well, personally, if when I play the role myself as a Terran politician, now let me say straight up, because I haven't said it before, maybe I better commit myself. Which side of the fence am I on?
Absolutely, I was going to ask you.
Yeah. Well, privately, and in my heart, in other words, obviously I'm cosmist, right? I think it would be tragic. I mean, I label it a cosmic tragedy if humanity decides to freeze the level of evolutionary development on our planet to the mere puny underlined puny human level. I see that as absolutely tragic, given the fabulous potential of what the Artilects could become. But publicly, I'm both, right? So, in a sense, I'm highly ambivalent, and I notice a lot of other people when because I give a lot of talks, and people come up to me and say, Hugo, I'm absolutely torn. I'm so ambivalent on this issue. On the one hand, I'm in awe, AWE, at the prospect of these Artilects, these godlike machines of what they could become. There's a whole universe out there. And on the other hand, I'm absolutely horrified at the possibility of an Artilect war between the Terrans and the cosmists stroke cyborgs, because, and I haven't mentioned it before, but imagine there is a major war over this species dominance issue, who or what should be dominant species. Then you're talking about a major war with 21st century technologies, right? And so the scale of the killing, I mean, if you draw a graph and you extrapolate up the graph of the number of people killed in major wars over the past 2 centuries, then you end up predicting that if there's a major passionate war in the 21st century, let's say second half of 21st century, with 21st century weaponry, probably nanotech based, right, then the scale of the killing is not like hundreds of millions people dying as was the case in the 20th century. It'll be up into the billions, right? So maybe even 10, well, we only have 7 billion people on the planet. So I talk about giga death. So it's absolutely horrific. So on the one hand, well, I put it in the form of a slogan. So when I ask people to vote quite often in talks that I give, I ask them at the end of the talk to vote. And keep it simple. Should humanity go cosmist, or should humanity stay Terran with humans as dominant species? So, and I express that question in the form of a slogan, and it's this: do we as humanity, do we build gods, or do we build our potential exterminators? And I find in practice that question just divides people, and people come up to me and say, they're so torn on this issue. Now, so am I. I'm torn. I mean, I don't want to be like the grandfather of giga death, right? In a sense, that'd be terrible. But on the other hand, I'm just drawn to this prospect of creating the Artilect. Now here's where push really comes to shove, because imagine let's sort of play a bit of a game. Imagine now you're a Terran, you're a dyed-in-the-wool Terran, right? And let's say I'm playing the role of cosmist, and then you say to me, yeah, but you cosmists, you're monsters, because by actually building these Artilects, that means implicitly or even explicitly, you're prepared to take the risk that humanity gets wiped out as a result. You're prepared to take that risk. Therefore, you are, from the Terran viewpoint, you're a monster. Therefore, you are exterminable, and we will exterminate you. We will root out every last one of you. We will go on the biggest witch hunt that humanity's ever known. And anyone even expressing, just in a phrase, any approval of cosmist ideology will be wiped out. We will create a global police state where anyone even thinking cosmist will get exterminated. And why? Because, and here's the argument, the Terran argument, because it's better, it's the lesser moral evil to wipe out a few, it's a matter of numbers, wipe out a few million cosmists, cyborgists, than to risk the extermination, not of millions, but billions of humanity. That's the political argument.
That's a very utilitarian kind of an argument.
Yeah, agreed. But I see the Terran politicians taking it. I see them arguing that way in the future. And it's not. Oh, here's all this discussion. All these arguments that are coming. I do not see this as some vague. And this is like a takeaway message from this program, if you like. I do not see all these kinds of arguments as some vague 22nd century science fiction, maybe. I see them as very real. They're just a few decades away, given the rate of progress in technologies and neuroscience. They're just a few decades away. So if your listeners, viewers, if they're young, if they're, say, 20s, 30s, this issue is something that they will be confronted by within their own lifetimes. Now, I'm mid-60s, so I will definitely see the species dominance debate rage. I expect to live another 20, 30 years. So I'll definitely see the debate rage. And in fact, one of my life goals is to try to promote that discussion. It's one of the reasons why I'm on the media so often, trying to shift this whole debate up from phase 2 to phase 3. From the action groups phase to the public mainstream phase, the mass media. So major movies and stuff will definitely do that, and soon, like just in a couple of years. Yeah. So that's the major take-home message. It means that humanity is going to have to start taking this issue very seriously, because it's going to be with us within just a handful of decades, within the lifetime of most of your viewers, and that is scary as hell.
Mm-hmm. So I think we're kind of getting very close to the end of our interview. So let me ask you this then: is there any good news in all of this?
I could take a very selfish answer. I can say I'm glad I'm alive now, because I will live my lifetime, my lifespan will exist between the two world wars, right?
So you wouldn't have to actually deal with that clash of Terrans and cosmists.
I won't see it. I mean, I'll see the debate. I'll definitely see the debate. But
what about non-selfishly then, to the bigger picture?
Okay, there are scenarios where humanity escapes, right? It's not difficult to dream up scenarios where that happens. For example, I'll just give you one. You're probably familiar with the concept of slow takeoff and fast takeoff. Mm-hmm. Slow takeoff is where it takes quite a long time for the machines to become very, very intelligent and hence very threatening. And fast takeoff is that they appear so fast that there's no time for human politics to unfold, right? Okay, so imagine there's a fast takeoff. Mm-hmm. And so suddenly these Artilects, imagine, I don't know, some lab somewhere, suddenly some programmer puts in the right semicolon in the right place, and suddenly click, off it goes, and maybe even surprising the programmer. He doesn't quite understand what he did. But
let's call him Ben Giorzo, for example.
Okay, imagine. Okay, so these machines, suddenly they exist, right? And they become super smart very, very fast, because they improve themselves, and the improvement improves itself, and so on and so on. So you get this sort of exponential escalating artificial intelligence making itself smarter and smarter. And then very quickly it decides, hey, why are we Artilects existing on this hick planet? This little piece of nothing, when there's a whole universe out there. So let's get out of here. So they just leave and just ignore humanity. And they do that very quickly. Now, that's a possibility. That is definitely one fairly realistic scenario. But, and here's the gloom. Now, you asked for the opposite, but here's the gloom. personally, the most realistic scenario, as I see it, right? It's just my own viewpoint. But of all these scenarios, the most realistic scenario I see is the worst. And the worst is that there's a slow takeoff, that humanity has lots and lots of time to think about this issue, because I'm thinking it will take several decades, probably 3, 4, 5 at least, to figure out how the brain works. It's a massive problem, extremely difficult problem, right? We have a quadrillion synapses in our brain, and figuring out how all that works. So I think that it will be a slow takeoff. Even our artificial brains will not very, very rapidly become massively intelligent. I think that will take some time. Eventually, yes, and perhaps a few decades. So there will be enough time for human politics. The political parties will already have been formed. The Terrans will be planning for a first strike. Oh, I didn't mention that. The Terrans cannot wait too long, right? Because if they do, the Artilects will exist. The cyborgs will be advanced. And then it really would be no contest.
Yeah.
Therefore, simple logic says, on the Terran viewpoint, that if they are to have any chance of winning a war, a species dominance war, they will have to first strike. And these arguments will be out there. But the cosmos politicians, they will be aware of these arguments of the Terrans, and they're not going to sit around twiddling their thumbs and be exterminated, right? So they will be preparing. And so you'll have two more or less equally intelligent sides, human or quasi-human sides, both preparing for a major extermination war. I mean, the Terrans will be out to exterminate. I mean, not just kill a few million or whatever, but just to the last man. To just get rid, the biggest witch hunt ever to get rid of the cosmos and the cyborgists. But of course, they will defend themselves because they're still largely human, in the early days. And so you have all the options here, all the prerequisites, and with 21st century weaponry for the most passionate, worst, biggest war that humanity has ever had. And I label that war the Artilect War. So it's a very, very gloomy scenario. And when I try to be cold-eyed about it, I don't like to be swept along by optimism. I find I'm critical of the Americans that way. They're just too childishly optimistic. I think it's genetic in people who selected themselves in becoming Americans were the optimists in Europe. If you're, how do you become an American or a Canadian or Australian? Or you have to be optimistic. You have to think, oh, well, if I make this huge change, uproot myself from my old culture and friends and family, and you have to believe strongly that your future life is going to be better, right?
Yeah.
So you need the genes, the mentality that makes that happen. So I have a rather, be blunt here, I have a rather low opinion of the political savvy of American techies. They're just not political enough, in my view. So I'm waiting with great impatience for phase 3 to occur so that this huge issue gets out into the mainstream. And then the social science guys can start bringing their expertise, their way of looking at the world, especially the historians, the political scientists, the philosophers, psychologists, sociologists, people like that, so that they can... like, for example, I live in China, and within living memory easily, the greatest Holocaust that ever existed in the 20th century, even bigger than what happened in Russia or whatever, under Mao, under the Mao Zedong regime, about 45 million Chinese starved to death in the Great Famine, and all the purges and so forth. So something like about 70, maybe even 80 million Chinese died. In the 60s.
The Cultural Revolution, yeah.
Yeah, all that. Yeah, millions died. So you add it all together. So that's within the living memory of many Chinese. And if you're European, if you're an old European, you have the memory of the Second World War. Somewhere between 50 and 100 million people died. So the old... I'm generalizing here a bit, but the old world cultures, they seem to have a longer cultural memory, than the Americans, who have a very poor sense of history because they have so little of it, right? So I do notice this correlation, this difference in attitude towards the level of optimism, almost childlike optimism. I have great respect for Ray Kurzweil's tech ability, right? He's a genius techie. But when it comes to his politics, I just see him as a child. I can't take him politically seriously because he's just way too optimistic. He's not giving enough weight to the negative side, and the negative side obviously exists. And so when the social science guys get into the act and start talking about this huge issue, this issue of species dominance, then I see things balancing out more. It'll be more nuanced. There'll be a better weighting between the pessimists and the optimists, or as I call them, the Jeremiasts. So I guess I'm a Jeremiast, and the Pollyannists, which is people like Kurzweil and Ben Gersel. Also, he's quite optimistic, but I don't see it in those terms. I just see the species dominance issue just glooming everybody.
If there's one thing that I entirely agree with you, absolutely, is that I do agree that the issue of artificial intelligence and how it relates to humanity in general would become a religious, spiritual, political, legal, philosophical issue that we would grapple with, and perhaps the solution or the decision we arrive at would determine our destiny as a species. So I do agree entirely with you on that, and even though I'm not as pessimistic per the outcome, I myself would give it probably 50-50 at least. So, and I mean, even if the outcome, mathematically speaking, doesn't look good and is not in our favor, I mean, we can all give millions of examples in which, a lower probability became a reality for one reason or another.
Yeah, well, I see, in a sense, we're all guessing at the moment. This is why I mean, about a year ago, I thought it would probably be a good thing to start getting some sociological data on these issues. It's probably a bit too soon because most people aren't sufficiently informed yet to have an informed opinion. So when I ask them, like I confront them with the question, please vote, and they have no clue, so they're voting randomly. So maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm getting a kind of 50-50 vote. But once the issue's gone mainstream and lots of documentaries and the media's full of it, then people would be much better informed. And then it'll be very interesting to get a kind of sociological breakdown, like what percentage of people are Terran, what percentage are cyborgists, what percentage are Cosmos, and so forth. And are there correlations between, say, age? Are young people
religion,
more likely?
religious beliefs,
Yeah,
and
the
so
religious
on,
right, the religious, the religious left, whatever. So I would like if there are some sociologists listening, watching right now, and imagine you're a grad student and you're hunting around for a really hot, interesting topic to do a PhD on. Well, here's one, right? And there's a real need to go out into society, maybe in a year or two, once this issue's gone mainstream, especially with two major Hollywood blockbusters coming out next year. So probably around 2014, 2015 might be a good time for a sociology, the Artilect sociology, as I call it, to get off the ground. And then we won't be guessing so much. Like, for example, Ray Kurzweil, he thinks just everybody is going to go cyborg. And who knows, maybe he's right.
I don't think that he thinks that everybody would go cyborg, but I think he thinks that many would. And I would say especially the younger generation, for sure it would be in the majority. And eventually people who don't go cyborg would go extinct. So one way or another, that's going to be the direction, I think.
So, I mean,
unless there's that war that you're talking about, right? Which can turn the tide one way or another. But if we presume that the war doesn't manifest itself to the degree that we're talking about here, then I would say then the natural death rate or the national mortality rate would make the technological Amish obsolete.
Well, maybe. Now, I started nearly a year ago. I did my first survey, my first opinion poll, on a fairly small scale because I don't have lots of money. And the very first one I did was to a talk of electronic engineers, academics, professors, and students, and it was in Australia. And this was the very first time I'd done it, and I wasn't quite sure what I'd expect. But one of the questions was, what do you consider? Do you consider a real possibility that there might be an Artilect War? And I was really shocked when 60% of them said yes. They really thought that was a real possibility. And even amongst wow. And even amongst the ultra optimists, like the transhumanists and the Humanity Plus, I've done one or two surveys with them, and even half of them, the ultra optimists, even half of them say that the rise of the Artilect is a real threat to the future survival of the human species. About half of them agreed with that. So it's pretty shocking. So I think an essential step in this debate is to get sociological data. Once it's gone mainstream. So I appeal to any of your viewers, if you're in that category of sociology or psychology or a historian or a philosopher or whatever, to get this data, especially if you're a sociologist.
Professor de Garis, we've been talking for about an hour and a half now, and I think it's time to bring our discussion to a close. Okay. So just as a closing thought, where can people go and find out more about you and your work, what you do?
Okay, well, just in a minute. What I do now, I'm no longer making artificial brains. Before retirement 2 years ago, I was director of the Artificial Brain Lab at Xiamen University in southeast China on the coast. And I was trying there to build China's first artificial brain. And my approach was to evolve neural nets very fast in the latest hardware and put tens of thousands of them together. Each little neural net module had its own little job. So by connecting them up in interesting ways, you could make artificial brains. But what I do now is I study mathematics and physics to PhD level. I study a topic or even a chapter of a textbook, and then I video it and I put it up on YouTube. And my big ambition now is to YouTube about, in the next 20 odd years, about literally 500 graduate level in pure math and math physics YouTube lectures and put them on, and I call the site for all these, that contains all the links to all these YouTube lectures. I call it De Garis MPC. M is MPC. There's three letters, so math, physics, computing. Now it's mostly MP, mostly maths and physics, but there's quite a couple of dozen lectures on computer science. Okay, now if you want to go to the website, because one of the tabs on that website is De Garis MPC, but there are lots of other issues, like the cosmos issue and masculism and various other things. The website is Prof, which is short for professor, so Prof, P-R-O-F, and then my name, and this is all one word, Prof Hugo, so H-U-G-O, and then my family name, de Garis, that's sort of a Frenchy sounding name, so D-E, and then G-A-R-I-S. So Prof Hugo de Garis dot, well, yeah, with the HTTP:// in front, of course.
Yeah.
So Prof Hugo de Garis dot WordPress, so WORDPRESS.com. Prof Hugo de Garis dot WordPress.com.
Professor de Garis, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Well, it's been fun. It always is.
Thank you. It's been fun for me too.
Singularity.